when Jungkook whispered, "She doesn't deserve you." To Taehyung, caught on camera, the internet shattered. What led to that moment will break your heart. "She doesn't deserve you." The words left Jungkook's lips like a firecracker. Quiet, but blistering. Just as the camera panned too close, just as the flash caught his clenched jaw, just as the music died down in the background of the after-party where everyone else was pretending to be happy, Taehyung froze, champagne flute still raised in midair, eyes narrowing as if the weight of that sentence alone could bend time. The clip lasted only 3 seconds, but the silence afterward, the breath that caught in Taehyung's chest, the way his hand trembled almost imperceptibly, told the world what no press release ever could. The video leaked before dawn, but it started much earlier than that. The rooftop of the private venue in Seoul was dimly lit with rows of golden fairy lights swinging gently in the night breeze, the winter air crisp, the scent of smoked rosemary cocktails and anxiety in the air. It had been billed as a quiet celebration for Taehyung's engagement, strictly invite only, inner circle only, cameras off. But that promise was broken the moment Jungkook walked in late. All black suit, wet hair clinging to his forehead, eyes darker than the sky above. No one knew what had delayed him. Some whispered airport. Some said he'd argued with his manager about even coming. But he had come. And the moment he saw her, Taehyung's fiancé Jungkook's lips pressed together so tightly they went white. They hadn't spoken in 2 weeks. Not since the last rehearsal ended with Taehyung leaving the studio without a glance back. Not since Jungkook's silence had stretched into a wall no one could scale. But here they were again, forced into the same photograph, the same laugh track, the same polite smiles for the crowd. Taehyung looked tired beneath the makeup, the way someone looked when they've been convincing everyone around them that everything is fine. He laughed at all the right moments, touched her back gently as they walked from table to table. But Jungkook saw it. The flickers, the distant look, the way Taehyung's shoulders stiffened every time she placed her hand on his. Jungkook wasn't looking for it, but he noticed. Because he always did. The night grew colder, and the music grew louder. And still they avoided each other like shadows on opposite ends of the same flame. Until the speech. Someone handed Taehyung the mic. He didn't want it, but he took it anyway. He talked about love, about promises, about the beauty of companionship, but his voice cracked when he said the word forever. He smiled and looked at her like he was supposed to. But Jungkook could see it, he wasn't looking at her. He was staring just past her shoulder, at him, and Jungkook couldn't breathe. The applause came like waves, but Jungkook's feet moved on their own, carrying him to the edge of the balcony where he could finally exhale. And that's where Taehyung found him minutes later, not speaking, just watching the city. Taehyung lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years. "It's not what it looks like," he said. Jungkook didn't turn. "Isn't it?" Taehyung leaned back against the rail. "You think I don't feel it? The gap? The silence? Every second I'm with her, I'm thinking about everything I never said to you." Jungkook swallowed. "Then why are you marrying her?" Taehyung didn't answer. That's when the camera caught them. Not the fan cameras, not the official press. Just someone's phone, forgotten on the table, angled carelessly toward the night. But it caught it the way Jungkook turned, eyes glistening, voice raw. "She doesn't deserve you." 3 seconds, that's all it took to break the internet. And afterward? The headlines spun, but the truth unraveled in smaller moments. Like how Taehyung canceled the press shoot the next day. How Jungkook's car was seen outside Taehyung's apartment at midnight, engine running for over an hour. How she posted a cryptic Instagram story with a black screen and a broken ring emoji, then deactivated hours later. The fans theorized. The company denied. The silence between Jungkook and Taehyung on stage became louder than any ballad they performed. But beneath it all, memories crawled back. Of practice rooms and sweat and laughter. Of late-night studio sessions where Taehyung would play guitar and Jungkook would sing off-key just to make him laugh. Of that one time in Paris, where the city lights blurred behind rain-streaked glass, and Taehyung had whispered something in Korean that Jungkook never translated, but memorized anyway. Of a photo neither of them posted, just Jungkook's thumb brushing against Taehyung's jaw. Eyes soft with something they couldn't name yet. The love had always been there. But so had the fear. Taehyung feared the world. The backlash, the consequences, the label, the family. Jungkook feared the silence. The slow fading of everything they never dared to say aloud. Now the words had been spoken. But too late, the video didn't fade. It went viral, and somewhere in the echoes of a private rooftop moment now public, the world held its breath. Because for the first time, Jungkook didn't run from the storm. He walked into it. And Taehyung might follow, or not. But either way, those words hung like constellations above the chaos of fame and expectation. She doesn't deserve you. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. The city was still humming beneath them as Taehyung leaned against the railing, the cigarette between his fingers trembling ever so slightly, its ember reflecting in his eyes like some tiny dying star. The air between them was thick with unsaid things, and Jungkook's jaw clenched as he looked straight ahead, not trusting himself to look at the man beside him. The words he had let slip, no, not slip, because they were deliberate, honest, inevitable, still echoed in his own ears. She doesn't deserve you. They'd been born from months of silence, of watching from afar, of biting his tongue until it bled, of performing side by side while feeling miles apart. He had thought about saying it 100 times, and now it was out, irretrievable, lingering in the air between them like smoke. Taehyung's expression didn't change at first. His body was still, but his breathing wasn't. Jungkook could hear it the way his chest rose and fell just a little too quickly, like someone trying not to break down in the middle of a war zone. Then Taehyung exhaled, long and slow, the smoke curling around his features, framing him like a portrait Jungkook could never stop staring at. "You shouldn't have said that," he said quietly. "I know." "You don't know what it's like," Taehyung muttered, his voice bitter. "To wake up every day next to someone and still feel like your lungs are collapsing. To smile for everyone. To pretend she's what I want. To pretend this life, this path I chose isn't killing me 1 inch at a time." Jungkook turned to him then. "Then why choose it?" Taehyung laughed, but it was hollow. "Because I thought maybe I'd get used to it. Maybe I'd forget. Maybe I'd learn to love her the way she loves me." "You won't," Jungkook said without blinking. "You know you won't." The silence between them was shattered by the sound of the door to the rooftop swinging open. They both tensed, and Taehyung instinctively took a step back, hiding the cigarette behind him like a teenager caught in rebellion. But it was only Jimin. He stopped when he saw them, eyes flicking between the two, reading the tension instantly. "They're asking for you," he said to Taehyung, his voice careful, controlled. "They're getting ready to cut the cake." Taehyung didn't move. Jimin waited, but when Taehyung didn't speak, his gaze shifted to Jungkook. There was something there, some quiet understanding, some recognition of the pain blooming silently between them. Jimin nodded slightly, then turned and left without another word. As the door closed again, Taehyung let out a sharp breath and rubbed a hand down his face. "I can't do this," he whispered. "I can't go down there and smile like nothing happened. Not after that." "Then don't," Jungkook replied. "Walk away. Come with me." Taehyung looked at him, eyes wide. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious." Taehyung laughed again, this time a little more real, a little more wounded. "Do you have any idea what would happen if I did that? The headlines? The backlash? The fans? My family? Her family? They'd crucify us." "They already crucify us for breathing too close to each other," Jungkook snapped. "Might as well give them a reason." Taehyung fell silent, the war raging behind his eyes louder than any music that drifted up from the party below. He turned away, facing the city again, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I've always envied you," he said finally. "You do what you want. You sing what you feel. You chase the truth even if it hurts. I've been pretending for so long, I don't even know who I am anymore." Jungkook stepped closer. "Then let me remind you." Taehyung looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time that night. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't sad. They were just tired and full of something raw and unspoken. "She's not a bad person," he whispered. "She's kind. She's patient. She doesn't deserve this either." "No, she doesn't," Jungkook agreed. "But this isn't about her. It's about you, about what you want, what you've always wanted. And if you lie to yourself any longer, it's going to destroy you." The door opened again, and this time, it was her. She looked stunning, like always, in a white silk dress that shimmered beneath the lights. but her smile faltered the moment she saw them. Her eyes locked onto Taehyung, and then to Jungkook, and something passed over her face, confusion, then suspicion, then realization. She stepped forward slowly. "They're waiting, Tae." Taehyung didn't answer. "Everything's ready," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The toast, the photographers, the—" She trailed off as she looked between them again. "What's going on?" Taehyung opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Jungkook stood still, watching her, not with hate, but with clarity. She didn't deserve this, but neither did Taehyung, and certainly not like this. "You should go," Jungkook said quietly, looking at her. "This moment, it's not meant for an audience." She flinched like he'd slapped her. "Excuse me? Please," Taehyung said, his voice breaking. "Just give me a moment." She looked like she might argue, but then something in Taehyung's eyes made her stop. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the truth. She turned and walked away, not saying a word. When she was gone, Taehyung exhaled. "I don't know how to do this." "Start with the truth." Taehyung closed his eyes. "I still love you." The words fell like stones, sharp and heavy. Jungkook stepped closer, inches away now, the distance between them finally gone. "Then don't marry her," Taehyung's voice cracked. "And do what? Run away with you?" "Yes." "To where?" "Anywhere." "You think the world will let us?" "Let them try to stop us." For a long moment, Taehyung stared at him, something old and sacred shining in his eyes. He reached up, fingers brushing the side of Jungkook's face like he was afraid the image would disappear. "You haven't changed," he whispered. "You still make it sound so simple." "Because love is simple," Jungkook said. "It's the lies that make it complicated." Downstairs, someone was calling Taehyung's name over the microphone. The crowd clapped, oblivious to the war ending and beginning on the rooftop. Taehyung looked down at his suit, at the ring on his hand, and slowly slid it off. He placed it on the edge of the balcony. "Then let's stop lying." Jungkook didn't speak. He just took Taehyung's hand. Firm, steady, real. And for the first time in years, Taehyung smiled like he meant it. The door opened again behind them. But this time, neither of them turned. The footsteps behind them were slow, hesitant, not rushed like someone angry or searching, but like someone witnessing something they shouldn't have seen and didn't know whether to walk away or speak. The soft click of the door shutting again felt like the entire world sealing them in, the cold breeze brushing past their ears, like the breath of fate itself whispering that this moment was real, irrevocable, and fragile. Taehyung didn't let go of Jungkook's hand. If anything, he held tighter, as if afraid he would vanish again if he blinked, as if years of pretending could unravel into smoke if he allowed a single second of doubt. Jungkook could feel the tremble in Taehyung's fingers. Not from fear, but from release, finally. After all the silence, the guilt, the acting, here they were, two people standing bare before each other with no one left to lie to. But the truth was never quiet. It didn't wait patiently in corners or stay hidden behind velvet curtains. It demanded space. It shouted in echoes. And somewhere below them, the guests were growing restless. The MC called Taehyung's name again. Laughter erupted, light and unaware. Someone played a note on the piano, but none of it mattered. Taehyung's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke, and it cracked through the quiet like thunder barely held in check. "What if I ruin everything?" Jungkook didn't blink. Maybe it needed to be ruined. Taehyung's breath hitched. "Everything I built, everything my family expected, everything we promised them. You never promised yourself," Jungkook said, stepping closer, his free hand brushing Taehyung's cheek with a tenderness that felt centuries old. "You gave them everything, but you forgot yourself. You forgot us." The way Taehyung's eyes shimmered in the dim rooftop lights was unbearable. Not just tears, regret, years of it, all trapped behind a smile crafted to please the world and a silence that had cost them everything. "It was easier to pretend," Taehyung whispered. "I thought. If I just kept moving forward, the ache would go away." "Did it?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung looked at him, then shook his head. "It got worse." Jungkook leaned forward until their foreheads touched, the cold tip of Taehyung's nose against his. Their breaths mingled, warm puffs in the freezing air. "Then stop," Jungkook said, voice low but firm. "Stop hurting. Stop pretending. Choose yourself. Just this once. Choose us. The weight of the choice settled between them. Not like something to be decided on a whim, but something sacred that had waited far too long. And then, just as quickly, the rooftop door opened again and Jimin stepped out. This time with urgency written all over his face. He stopped in his tracks the moment he saw them hand in hand, foreheads pressed, the ring sitting abandoned on the edge of the balcony, like a symbol of a war that had finally been lost. Or won. Jimin didn't say anything at first. He looked at them, eyes flicking between their faces, his own expression caught between shock and something softer understanding, maybe even relief. They're starting to notice, Jimin finally said. Her manager is asking questions. Your father is calling you. Taehyung straightened, but didn't let go of Jungkook's hand. I'm not going back down. Jimin blinked. You're serious? I was never more serious, Taehyung said. Not even when I said yes to her. Then, Jimin stepped forward. You need to tell her before anyone else does. Before she hears it from the media. Before your family. I will, Taehyung said. But not as an apology, as a truth. Jimin looked at Jungkook. And you? Are you ready for what comes after this? Jungkook's voice didn't waver. I've been ready for years. Jimin gave a slow nod, then turned and disappeared back inside. And so it began. Not with a press conference, not with scandal, but with a quiet walk down the fire escape, hands still joined, past the noise of the party and into the chilled darkness of the parking lot where Jungkook's car waited like a getaway ship at the edge of the universe. Taehyung climbed in with a deep breath, the silence of the closed door like the shutting of a chapter. Jungkook drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other still holding Taehyung's, as if letting go now would undo the decision they'd both finally made. The city lights faded behind them. They didn't talk about where they were going, only that they weren't staying. Not there, not in that cage. They stopped at a gas station 2 hours out of Seoul. It was quiet, tucked under trees, the neon flickering like a heartbeat. Taehyung stepped out, head tilted back to stare at the stars. The night sky endless and terrifying and new. Jungkook came around the car and stood beside him. Do you regret it? He asked. Taehyung didn't answer immediately. He just took Jungkook's hand again, interlacing their fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. No, he said softly. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm dying inside. Jungkook smiled, a real one this time, and pulled him into an embrace that was warm and quiet and safe. They didn't speak for a long time, just held each other beneath the stars while the rest of the world screamed. The fallout came quickly. The video spread like wildfire, edited and re-edited, analyzed by fans, dissected by news anchors. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, drama. Some defended them, some cursed them, some cried. The label issued a vague statement about personal decisions and respecting privacy. She, the fiancé, posted a short letter the next day poised, gracious, heartbroken. He was never truly mine, it read. And maybe he never could be. Her courage in that moment earned her respect. Her silence after earned her dignity. And Taehyung, he stayed away. They both did. For weeks, they found a place by the sea, away from cameras, away from expectations. A small house with creaky floors and a record player that barely worked. They cooked meals together, woke up late, walked barefoot on cold sand and said nothing when their shoulders brushed. At night, they lay in bed, hands brushing but not always speaking, hearts learning how to beat in freedom again. Jungkook wrote music, Taehyung painted. Sometimes they switched. Sometimes they sat in silence, letting their presence be enough. Healing doesn't come with grand gestures. It comes in the quiet, in burnt toast, in shared blankets, in laughter that starts small and grows uncontainable, in whispered goodnights, in waking up and realizing you're still not alone. But they couldn't hide forever. One day, Taehyung woke up to find Jungkook already at the piano, fingers moving slowly over the keys, a melody forming that felt like a confession. Taehyung stood in the doorway, watching, heart aching in the best way. Play that again, he said. Jungkook looked up, startled. You heard that? I always hear you. So Jungkook played it again. And this time, Taehyung sang. No cameras, no microphones, just them, just truth. And that was the beginning of something new. When they returned because they would have to, eventually they returned not with an announcement, not with a performance, but with a song. One that didn't explain anything. One that didn't justify. It simply existed. Honest. Raw. Beautiful. It was about freedom. About choosing yourself. About love that survives the noise. And when they stood on stage again, weeks later, the world waited to see if the rumors were true, but there was no need to confirm anything. The way Taehyung looked at Jungkook as he sang was enough. The way Jungkook's voice cracked when Taehyung harmonized told the story. And maybe the world would never fully understand. Maybe some would always criticize. But in that moment, under the lights, with the crowd screaming their names, they chose each other again. Without apology. Without fear. Because love, real love, doesn't always come when it's convenient. But when it does, you fight for it. Even if it costs you everything you once thought mattered. Because in the end, the only thing that truly matters is who you are when the music fades and the lights go down, and you're left standing with the one person who never stopped seeing you. And in that truth, they finally found peace. The crowd had become deafening. Not in sound, but in speculation. The silence they left behind had turned louder than any official statement could ever compete with. For days, the media kept trying to provoke a reaction, digging through past footage, dissecting every expression, every handshake, every off-mic glance between Jungkook and Taehyung throughout the years. Clips resurfaced Taehyung's lingering stares during award shows, Jungkook's protective stance in crowded spaces, the way they looked at each other when they thought the cameras weren't watching. And now, after that rooftop confession, after the ring was left behind and Jungkook's words lit up like a match against the dry pages of public expectation, everything was reinterpreted, rewatched, reimagined, but the two of them stayed quiet. Not to hide, not to avoid, but because for the first time in their lives, they didn't owe the world an explanation. They only owed each other the truth. Morning sun bathed the little coastal house in warm gold as seagulls cried somewhere in the distance. The sound of waves lapping the shore was constant, soothing a heartbeat that replaced the rush of interviews and rehearsals. Taehyung sat by the window with a sketchpad in his lap, bare feet curled beneath him, hair unbrushed, sleeves pushed up, pencil dancing slowly across the page. He wasn't drawing Jungkook's face, but it lived in every stroke. His posture, his silence, his storm. Meanwhile, Jungkook stood in the kitchen, humming the tune they'd been working on the past few days, bare chest rising with steady breath, flour on his hands from a breakfast he hadn't finished making. He paused every now and then to glance at Taehyung, to ensure the man he loved was still there, still breathing beside him, still real. Because sometimes, the quiet felt like a dream too soft to survive the weight of reality. They'd gone days without turning on their phones. But when they finally did, a sea of chaos greeted them. Messages from managers, family, bandmates, friends, strangers, some angry, some terrified, some understanding. Jin had sent a simple text. You chose truth. That's rare. And brave. Namjoon had written a poem cryptic and beautiful. As always. Hoseok sent a meme that made them both laugh for the first time in days, then followed it up with, whatever happens next, I've got you. Jimin called. 10 times! When Taehyung finally picked up, Jimin's voice was strained, like he hadn't slept. She went on a talk show, he said. Taehyung's spine stiffened. What did she say? Nothing bad, Jimin said. She didn't drag you. Just said you were always honest with her. That maybe she was hoping you'd change your mind. She cried a little. The crowd loved her. Taehyung swallowed. I never wanted to hurt her. You did, Jimin said softly. But you also saved yourself. She'll be okay. She'll move on. The world will too. What about you? Taehyung looked across the room where Jungkook stood, eyes full of quiet concern, hand paused over a bowl of batter. I'm beginning. That night, under the soft thrum of a pale moon, Taehyung stepped outside alone, wrapped in an oversized hoodie that smelled like Jungkook, and walked toward the beach. The sand was cold. The ocean stretched out in eternal indifference. He stood where the water barely kissed his toes and let his thoughts wander. Regret would come, guilt would linger. But above all of it, something else had started to bloom freedom. Not just from expectations, but from the weight of his own silence. He heard footsteps behind him. Jungkook! Of course. They didn't need words. Taehyung tilted his head slightly, just enough to let him know he was welcome, and Jungkook stepped beside him, their shoulders brushing. I used to dream about this, Jungkook said quietly. You and me. Somewhere no one knows our names. Taehyung smiled faintly. I didn't think it would feel this peaceful. I thought I'd be drowning in shame. Maybe you are, Jungkook said, but you're still breathing.
They stayed there for a long time. In the coming days they recorded again, not for an album, not for fans, just for themselves, raw vocals, unpolished melodies, lyrics that stung and healed in equal measure. It was in one of those midnight sessions with candles flickering and the wind shaking the windows that Taehyung finally broke. He stood suddenly, voice caught in his throat, eyes filled with something unspoken. Jungkook stopped playing. What is it? I kept this, Taehyung said, pulling a folded, faded letter from a small box tucked beneath the piano bench. You wrote it before we debuted, remember you told me if we ever got lost we'd find each other in the music. Jungkook stared at the paper. I thought you threw that away. I almost did, Taehyung said, but something stopped me. Maybe I knew one day I'd need it, like a map back to you. Jungkook didn't speak. He just reached for the guitar again and played the very melody he had written that same year, unreleased, unheard, but never forgotten. Taehyung sang, and it broke something inside both of them wide open. Vulnerability flooded the room like light breaking through a dam. And still the world waited. But this time when they came back together, not with press tour or dramatic headlines, just one post, a black and white photo. Taehyung and Jungkook side by side in a studio, no captions, no filters, just truth. The comments exploded, some hearts broke, others celebrated, but there was no turning back. They walked through the fire hand in hand. When the award season came, their names were nominated together for a surprise EP that had dropped quietly one night without promotion. It was full of aching verses and stripped-down sounds. It wasn't made for charts, but it topped them anyway. On the night of the award show, they arrived separately. The cameras were relentless, hopping for a slip. But on stage, when the lights dimmed and the final category was announced, they stood beside each other again. The crowd cheered as the host called their names. They didn't hug, they didn't cry. They just stood there smiling, knowing the journey behind them made that moment possible. Taehyung took the mic. This isn't about rebellion or scandal, it's about love, about being seen. About being honest with yourself even when it costs you everything you built for everyone else. He looked at Jungkook. Thank you for never letting me forget who I was. When they walked off stage hand in hand, there were no more questions left to answer, no more pretending. They disappeared backstage, hearts full, past the reporters, past the cameras, until they reached the hallway that led to the quiet. And there behind a curtain, Jungkook stopped him. Would you still choose me if we had to do it all over again? Taehyung leaned in, lips brushing his temple. Every time, the world may never fully understand them. But that's not what mattered anymore. What mattered was the hand in his, the song in their chest, and the quiet promise between them that no matter how loud the world got, they would always hear each other. Always. The hallway was dim, lit only by the fading glimmer of stage lights and the distant hum of celebration echoing from the auditorium behind them. But here in this narrow corridor, silence wrapped itself around Jungkook and Taehyung like a cloak, sacred and unbroken. They didn't need to speak. The applause they'd left behind was a fading storm, and in its place was a stillness that pulsed louder than noise, steady, grounding theirs. Jungkook's fingers curled tighter around Taehyung as he pulled him gently into an alcove between velvet curtains. Taehyung followed without hesitation, his breath shaky, eyes searching Jungkook's face as if anchoring himself again in something real after being seen by thousands. The moment the crowd roared their names, the moment they stepped into the light together and felt the heat of a world's gaze collide with the weight of years they'd carried in silence, something irreversible had broken loose. Not a fracture, something necessary, something long overdue. Jungkook looked at him in the quiet with a softness so profound it nearly hurt. His thumb brushed over Taehyung's knuckles, a small motion but grounding. You did it, he whispered. You stood in front of them and told the truth. Taehyung swallowed, his heart thudding painfully loud in his chest. We did it. Jungkook's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes remained heavy, not tired, just full. Full of the weight of everything unsaid, of everything they'd sacrificed, of the world that had forced them into corners and told them how to love, who to be, when to speak. And full of the impossible miracle that they were still here, still holding each other. You know what I remember the most? Jungkook said after a moment. It's not the rehearsals or the wins or even the fights, it's the silence. That night you left my place without a word. That night you didn't even look back. Taehyung's breath caught. I looked back, he said. You just didn't see me. I waited by the door, Jungkook replied. For hours. I stood outside, Taehyung confessed. I didn't have the courage to knock again. I thought you hated me. I did, Jungkook said, not unkindly, but only because I loved you too much. Taehyung leaned against the wall, closing his eyes, trying to steady the rhythm of memories rushing through him like floodwater. There was no map for what they were doing now, no script, no manager's plan, just a path carved out of old wounds and new beginnings. "Can I be selfish now?" Taehyung asked quietly. "You're allowed." "I want to go back," he said, looking at him. "Back to the sea. Back to the days where we cooked with no schedule, where we made music because we needed to, not because someone was waiting. Back to the slow mornings where your hair smelled like cinnamon and your shirt always ended up on me." Jungkook stepped closer. "Then let's go. What about the contracts? Let them wait. What about the fan? They'll understand, and the ones who don't never really saw us anyway. What about your mother?" Jungkook's gaze softened. "She called me," he said, "yesterday. Told me she's never seen me happier, that she doesn't need to understand it, just that she trusts me. That's more than I ever got," Taehyung whispered. Jungkook cupped his cheek gently. "Then we'll build something better together for us." They left the building through the back, slipping past camera crews and fans, their fingers intertwined in the shadows. The city lights glittered like secrets waiting to be kept, but they didn't look back. They took the long road home, the one that wound past the Han River, the one they used to drive on when the world felt too heavy and they needed to escape. Jungkook rolled down the window, the wind slicing through the car and pulling laughter from their lips, real, unfiltered, loud. Taehyung leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed, the wind tousling his hair as he reached blindly for Jungkook's hand and found it waiting, warm and unwavering. They arrived at the seaside just past midnight. The sky was clear, the stars hung low like they were listening. Taehyung stepped out first, his boots crunching against gravel, and walked toward the sand without speaking. Jungkook followed, and when they reached the edge of the water, they stood there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, letting the chill wrap around them. "I always thought we'd end in fire," Taehyung said. "Some messy fight, public disaster, you storming out, me walking away. I never imagined we'd find our way back like this." "We still might end in fire," Jungkook said softly, "but now we'll burn together." Taehyung turned to him slowly, eyes shining with something fierce and sacred. "Would you still choose me in the next life?" Jungkook didn't hesitate. "In every life." They kissed then, not a desperate kiss. Not the kind that begged or apologized or tried to erase the past. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I know you, I've missed you, I've mourned you, and I never stopped loving you." The kind of kiss that stitched something broken back together with threads of grace. The next few weeks passed in soft, unmeasured time. They cooked again, burned rice twice, ate cereal out of the box while barefoot in the hallway. They danced to old jazz records, made pillow forts, left dishes unwashed, and slept in until the sun warmed their skin through the windows. They also argued about nothing and everything, about who forgot to close the studio window, about Taehyung not answering his phone, about Jungkook's habit of bottling up everything until it exploded in a storm of tears and silence. But they always came back, always apologized, always touched fingertips under the table and whispered, "I'm still here." Healing wasn't linear, but it was real, and with each day, the shadows they'd carried began to fade beneath the weight of shared mournings and unspoken forgiveness. One night, as the wind howled outside and rain tapped gently against the roof, Taehyung sat at the piano, barefoot, hair damp from the shower, humming a melody that had been haunting his dreams. Jungkook walked in quietly, pulled a blanket over his shoulders, and sat beside him. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's unfinished," Taehyung replied. "Maybe we can finish it together. We always do." So they played and sang and recorded, and when the song was done, they didn't post it, didn't release it. They kept it for themselves, tucked away on a hard drive labeled Simply Us, because not everything had to be given to the world. Some things were meant to be kept, and when the storms came again, as they always do, they knew this time they wouldn't be torn apart, because they had already chosen each other, not for fame, not for show, but because love, when stripped of everything else, is a quiet, unshakable thing. It waits, it endures, and when it's real, it returns, always, absolutely. I will now continue the narrative in the same immersive, uninterrupted, and emotionally rich style, picking up directly from the moment Jungkook and Taehyung recorded the song labeled Us and chose to keep it for themselves. This continuation will maintain the tone, depth, and visual texture of the previous parts, with no interruptions, no mention of episodes or word counts. Please hold on while I write the next full portion for you. Days stretched like silk ribbons across the quiet shoreline, soft and endless. There were no alarms, no scheduled interviews, no stage rehearsals waiting behind ticking clocks. There was only the hush of sea foam at dawn, the slow breath of waves crawling over sand, and the way Taehyung would mumble in his sleep when Jungkook pulled him closer beneath tangled sheets. They had slipped from the tempo of the world and into something slower, sacred. It was as if time had finally decided to listen to them, not the other way around. They cooked too much food and left half of it unfinished. They painted on the walls of their rented seaside home, giggling like teenagers as splashes of color ruined their shirts. Jungkook painted Taehyung's back once, tracing the curve of his shoulder blade with cobalt blue while Taehyung shivered under the brush, not from cold, but from the intimacy of being known so gently. Nights were the softest. Jungkook would read aloud from books he never finished, his voice quiet and warm, while Taehyung sprawled beside him on the couch, one leg draped over Jungkook, fingers playing with the hem of his sleeve. Sometimes they fell asleep mid-conversation, their voices fading into the rhythm of the rain tapping on the roof. They stopped wearing watches. They didn't count the days, they existed inside them. And yet, beneath the comfort of the silence, a question lingered, waiting for the right moment to rise. Not a threat, but a truth too large to ignore forever. It came one evening as they stood on the porch, watching the storm roll in from across the horizon. The sky was bruised with shades of violet and gray, and the scent of salt and thunder lingered in the wind. Taehyung's arms were crossed, a wool sweater pulled over his frame, hair swept messily by the breeze. Jungkook leaned against the wooden post, sipping tea, his eyes never leaving the shifting clouds. "How long do we stay here?" Taehyung asked suddenly, voice so low it nearly got carried away by the wind. Jungkook turned slowly. "Until we forget what we're running from." "I'm not running anymore," Taehyung said. "Then what are we doing?" Jungkook asked. "Healing," Taehyung answered. "Hiding," Jungkook countered. Taehyung exhaled. "Maybe both. And when the world calls again." Jungkook's voice was steady, but there was something raw beneath it. Taehyung didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer until their shoulders brushed, until the silence became warmer. "Then we answer," he whispered, "but on our terms." The words settled between them like a promise. Later that night they sat down together and turned on the camera. Not for the label, not for the fans, just for themselves. A conversation unfiltered, unscripted, raw. Taehyung talked first about fear, about expectations, about how it felt to smile while suffocating. Jungkook followed, speaking about silence, about grief, about the years he spent watching Taehyung pretend he was okay. They laughed, they cried, they didn't edit a second of it. And when it was done, they stared at the screen for a long time, watching themselves speak with the kind of honesty neither of them had dared before. "Do we post it?" Taehyung asked. "No," Jungkook said, "not yet. Then when we're not afraid of losing what we found." But the world never stopped spinning. Rumors began to shift from scandal to sympathy. Old critics turned silent. A new wave of support began to rise, not just from fans, but from people who saw something brave in what they had done. It wasn't about defiance anymore, it was about vulnerability. One day their label sent a message: "You don't have to rush, but when you're ready, the door is open." That night, Jungkook sat at the piano again. He had been writing a new song in secret, one Taehyung hadn't heard. When Taehyung walked into the room, hair damp from the shower, Jungkook didn't stop playing. He looked up, eyes shining. "I wrote this for the version of us that never stopped waiting." Taehyung crossed the room slowly and sat beside him, resting his chin on Jungkook's shoulder. The melody was soft, aching like an echo of something they almost lost. And the lyrics, oh, the lyrics were made of all the words they used to bite back. Afterward, Taehyung said nothing. He just kissed him, slow and deep, as if every note had unraveled something inside him that words never could. The next morning they sent the song to the label. No explanation, no attached message, just the file, raw and unpolished. The label released it without warning. No teaser, no campaign, just a midnight upload with no music video. And yet it climbed the charts, it shattered records, not because it was catchy but because it was true. Fans wept. Strangers wrote essays. Critics went quiet. And in the storm of all of it, Jungkook and Taehyung stayed where they were, on the beach in each other's arms, not looking at the numbers. They only checked the comments once, just once. And among the millions, there was one that made Taehyung's throat close. "I always knew, love like that doesn't hide forever." As spring melted into summer, they returned to the city not to reclaim fame but to rebuild something new. They signed new contracts, ones they read carefully this time, ones that gave them space. They returned to the stage with music that didn't beg for attention but offered a hand to those still searching for themselves. At their first comeback show, they stood side by side again, hearts pounding, hands brushing briefly before the lights went out and the crowd roared. And when the chorus hit, they didn't look at the audience. They looked at each other. The world could speculate, could dissect, could judge, but they knew, and knowing was enough. Later backstage, Taehyung sat on the floor, sweat dripping down his neck, chest heaving, adrenaline making his hands shake. Jungkook crouched beside him, offered a water bottle, then wiped the sweat from his brow. "You okay?" he asked. Taehyung nodded slowly. That didn't feel like a performance, it felt like a homecoming. Because it was, Jungkook said, "We came home to ourselves." In the months that followed, they traveled not for work but for wonder. Italy, Morocco. A tiny town in Iceland where no one recognized them, and they danced under the northern lights with frozen fingers and burning hearts. They met other people with hidden truths, with stories too fragile to share. And in those encounters they became something more than artists. They became mirrors. They began to speak at universities, not about fame, but about vulnerability, about silence, about choosing love in a world that profits from pretending. Years passed, their hair changed, their voices matured, their names remained, but the meaning evolved. And one day, older now with lines around their eyes and laughter in their bones, they sat down together to record that video they'd made so long ago. The one they never posted. They rewatched it first, holding hands, hearts quiet. Then they pressed upload, no caption, just a timestamp. The world stopped again, not for gossip, not for scandal, but for something far more rare, for truth. And when it aired, people didn't scream, they listened. On a quiet evening many years later in that same house by the sea, Taehyung stood on the porch while Jungkook tuned his guitar nearby. The sky was painted in gold and ash. "Do you regret it?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook looked up, smiled, eyes soft with years. "Only that we didn't do it sooner." Taehyung nodded, then leaned against the doorframe. "What do you think people will say when we're gone?" "That we loved out loud," Jungkook said, "and maybe that's enough. And in that silence where once fear lived, love now breathed freely. Not hidden, not rushed, just eternal, just theirs." The breeze off the ocean carried the scent of memory, salt, pine, and a sweetness that only existed when the sky was burning with twilight. Taehyung stood barefoot on the porch, the wood beneath his feet warm from the day's sun, and watched Jungkook inside, hunched over his guitar, brows furrowed in that familiar look of silent determination. He wasn't playing anything in particular, just letting his fingers find whatever melody lived under his skin that day. The room glowed golden around him, framed by curtains that danced lazily in the soft evening wind. Time had blurred its edges. The days bled into one another, not out of monotony but peace. There were no headlines now, no rumors sharp enough to cut them, no questions they hadn't already answered in their own way. Their love no longer lived in the shadows. It breathed in their mornings, lingered in their shared coffee mugs, stretched out between folded laundry and forgotten books scattered across the sofa. It was mundane, and it was everything. Jungkook looked up and met Taehyung's gaze through the window, a quiet smile forming, one of those soft, secret ones that belonged to no one else in the world. Taehyung stepped back inside, the floor creaking slightly under his weight. He walked straight to him the way he always did, like gravity only existed between them. He sat down beside him on the floor, leaned his head against Jungkook's shoulder, and closed his eyes. The music didn't stop. Jungkook just shifted slightly to accommodate him, the rhythm adapting as naturally as breath. "What are you writing?" Taehyung murmured. "Not sure yet," Jungkook replied. "It's still becoming." "Like us," Taehyung whispered, "always becoming." They stayed like that until the light faded completely and the stars blinked awake one by one. It wasn't until the fire crackled in the small hearth and the scent of roasted marshmallows filled the room that they moved again, Jungkook standing to stretch his back while Taehyung curled into the corner of the couch, one arm draped lazily over the backrest. "Do you remember the first time I said I loved you?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung's lips curled, eyes still closed. "Which time? You meant it or when you tried to pretend you did?" Jungkook chuckled, crossing the room and tugging Taehyung's legs across his lap. "The real one," he said. "Paris, after the showcase, I couldn't sleep. You came to my room and we sat by the window for hours. You didn't say anything, you just looked at the sky and said, 'If I say it, it'll ruin everything.' And I didn't say anything back, but I felt it. I was scared," Taehyung said, his voice a thread. "So was I, but you know what's strange?" Jungkook asked. "What?" "Even in the fear, I knew it would never really go away. Even if we burned, even if we lost everything, it would still live in me." "Did we lose everything?" "No," Jungkook said, brushing his thumb over Taehyung's ankle. "We found the parts of ourselves we gave away for safety. We got them back." There was a comfort now that didn't need proving. No need for matching clothes or shared screen time. They existed freely in their own rhythms, sometimes apart, sometimes together. Taehyung had started painting again in earnest. His studio was filled with canvases that weren't for galleries, only for the soul. Jungkook would wander in at times, sit on the floor, and watch the colors come alive without asking questions. Taehyung rarely explained his work, but once after finishing a piece of two figures standing back to back but casting a single shadow, he turned to Jungkook and said quietly, "This one is us during the years we couldn't speak." Jungkook had walked to him, pressed a kiss to the nape of his neck, and said nothing. It was enough. Their love wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need declarations or desperate glances. It was in the way Jungkook brewed tea exactly how Taehyung liked it. In the way Taehyung saved the last bite of his favorite dessert without being asked. It was in folded laundry, in silent understanding, in hands reaching across a dark room just to know the other was still there. It was in the morning silence, in shared toothbrushes, in the scars they no longer tried to hide. But the world hadn't stopped completely. Letters still arrived. Fans still wrote, their words a mix of gratitude and longing. Some thanked them for being brave. Others mourned what they thought they had lost. But one letter, handwritten in neat, uncertain strokes, stood out. "I used to think love meant hiding. Now I know it means choosing. Thank you for teaching me how to choose myself." Jungkook kept that letter in his drawer, not because it fed his ego, but because it reminded him that their story didn't belong to them alone anymore. It had become a lighthouse, not perfect, not without its cracks, but steady in its glow. One rainy morning, Taehyung stood in the kitchen frying eggs while music played softly from a speaker. Jungkook walked in half asleep, hair a mess, voice groggy. "Let's get married," he said. Taehyung paused, spatula midair. He turned, brows raised, a laugh bubbling in his throat. "Is that a proposal?" Jungkook shrugged. "Depends, did it work?" Taehyung put the pan down, crossed the kitchen slowly, and took Jungkook's face in his hands. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious about you," Jungkook said. "Always have been. We don't need papers. I know. We don't need rings. I know. But," Taehyung's voice broke, "I want one, just one day where the whole world knows without doubt, without denial, that I'm yours and you're mine." Wedding wasn't televised, it wasn't promoted. It happened in a field of wildflowers outside the city with only the people who mattered. Jimin officiated, Jin cried through the entire ceremony. Namjoon wrote a poem, Hoseok danced like it was the last night on earth. Their families sat together no longer fractured by confusion or fear. Their mothers held hands, their fathers shared drinks. And when Jungkook and Taehyung stood beneath the open sky, rings trembling in their fingers, no one spoke. Because some moments deserved reverence. When they kissed, it wasn't the beginning. It was the acknowledgement of every step that had brought them there, every silence, every touch, every time they chose each other when it would have been easier to walk away. They didn't post photos, but fans found out. And instead of chaos, something rare happened, a wave of warmth, of unity, of celebration not for idols but for two human beings who had finally come home to themselves and each other. Jungkook released a song a month later. It was soft, just a guitar and a whisper of strings. The last line was sung in a breath. I would have waited a lifetime if it meant you'd say yes. The world held its breath, then exhaled. And so life continued. With laughter, with quiet, with the ache of days passing too quickly and the comfort of knowing that some loves don't need to be loud to last. They aged, they changed, but the love remained, not just in memory but in every ordinary day. In shoes left by the door, in books stacked on nightstands, in shared silence that said more than 1,000 songs ever could. And in that quiet truth they found something neither fame nor fear could ever offer. They found forever. The morning after the wedding was quiet in a way that felt sacred, not empty. Dew clung to the edges of the wildflowers, the grass wet beneath bare feet, and the sun was rising slowly like it knew it wasn't in a rush, casting soft golden light over the field where memories still lingered in the folds of chairs, in footprints left in the dirt, in candles burned low and petals scattered like confetti. Taehyung sat cross-legged beneath the arch where they'd said their vows, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing only one of Jungkook's oversized shirts, sleeves draped well past his wrists. He was holding a mug of lukewarm coffee, not really drinking it, just breathing in the silence. His eyes were on the horizon, but his mind was full of the night before, of Jungkook's voice cracking when he promised forever, of Jimin crying into Hoseok's shoulder, of Jin swearing loudly that he should have been the one to catch the bouquet, and of how Jungkook had held his hand like he was afraid letting go would end the world. Inside the small farmhouse they'd borrowed for the weekend, Jungkook stirred awake alone in bed, his hand instinctively reaching for Taehyung's side and finding only cool linen. He blinked against the soft sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains, then pushed himself up, rubbing the back of his neck and smiling faintly when he saw the trail of wildflower petals that had stuck to Taehyung's socks and scattered across the wooden floor. He followed them barefoot, the boards creaking beneath his weight, heart already warming at the thought of Taehyung being outside alone, probably overthinking everything, sipping cold coffee and staring into the distance like a poem waiting to be written. When Jungkook opened the door, the breeze hit his skin like a song, cool and gentle, and there Taehyung was, still as the dawn, his silhouette backlit by golden light, his profile soft and full of something Jungkook didn't need to name. He walked up behind him, leaned down, and pressed a kiss to his crown, letting his lips linger in the strands of wind-blown hair. Taehyung didn't flinch. He leaned back instinctively, his free hand reaching for Jungkook's thigh, holding on. It still feels like a dream, Taehyung whispered. It is, Jungkook said, kneeling beside him, but it's our dream now. Taehyung turned to face him, his expression unreadable but open, vulnerable in that way only he knew how to be, with his whole soul exposed, no walls, no armor. You look terrified when you walked down the aisle, he teased gently. Jungkook chuckled. I thought I'd trip or say the wrong thing or cry before I even started speaking. You didn't, Taehyung said. You were perfect. You made me perfect, Jungkook replied softly, fingers brushing over Taehyung's wrist. Every part of me that was ever broken healed when you said yes. They stayed in the countryside for days after everyone else left, returning to the quiet rhythm they had built long before the wedding. They spent their mornings in oversized hoodies, eating breakfast on the porch, talking about nothing and everything. They took long walks through fields, sometimes in silence, sometimes singing old songs they hadn't performed in years. Jungkook had brought his camera and started filming again, not for content, not for fans, just to capture the fleeting moments Taehyung always forgot to notice in himself. Like the way he bit his lip when concentrating, or how he hummed when folding laundry, or the way he danced in the kitchen to music only he could hear. Taehyung painted the skis. Every evening was a canvas. Some looked like fire, some like rain, all of them were Jungkook. They didn't check social media, but their friends updated them in bits and pieces. Jimin called one night, breathless with excitement, reading headlines between laughter. You two broke the internet without even posting a single photo. Do you know how annoying that is for everyone else? Taehyung smiled, curled into Jungkook's side, their legs tangled beneath a blanket. Tell them to try being honest for once, he said, and Jimin cackled. The world had somehow bent instead of breaking. There were still voices that criticized, still articles that framed their love as controversial instead of courageous, but none of it mattered anymore. Because their truth had finally stopped trembling. and their love had learned how to breathe. One evening, during a sudden summer rain, they stood in the field barefoot, arms outstretched as the sky opened above them. Jungkook spun Taehyung around, both of them soaked, laughing like they were 17 again and had just discovered what joy felt like. Taehyung's curls stuck to his forehead, raindrops rolling down his cheeks like 1,000 blessings. Jungkook held his face between his palms, rain trailing down his own eyelashes, and kissed him like he was still trying to believe he was real. "Let's grow old here," Taehyung said, breathless. "Right here with this house, this sky, these fields." "We already are," Jungkook whispered, "just slower than the rest of the world." That night they made love without words, with the rain still pattering against the windows and the storm outside couldn't compete with the storm inside their chests. It was tenderness, not passion, devotion, not desire. It was the promise they had made years ago in silence, now spoken through touch, through breath, through the way they fell asleep afterward, wrapped around each other like roots beneath the earth. When autumn came, they returned to the city, not to reclaim the spotlight but to share what they'd found. Jungkook began mentoring younger artists, teaching them not just about vocals or stage presence, but about self-preservation, about integrity. He told them how to love themselves before trying to be loved by a million strangers. Taehyung opened a small gallery, not downtown but tucked in a quiet street, with ivy climbing its walls and the scent of paint always lingering in the air. He filled it with pieces he never named. People came, stood in silence before his work, and cried. When asked what inspired him, he only said, "A man I loved who refused to let me disappear." Every year on their anniversary, they returned to the house by the sea. They lit candles, played the songs they never released, watched the waves, and held hands in silence. They never brought guests. It was a ritual just for them. A way to remind themselves of the long road they had walked, of every word they never got to say when they were young, of the battles they fought with trembling voices and tired hearts, and how none of it had been in vain. On their 10th anniversary, Jungkook surprised Taehyung with a letter. "You once told me you wished I could see myself the way I saw you. So I wrote it down every day, every detail, every time your smile saved me, every time your silence taught me, every time your love healed what I thought would never be whole." Taehyung read it that night by candlelight, tears falling onto the page, blurring ink. And when he finished, he didn't say a word. He just climbed into Jungkook's lap, cupped his face, and kissed him with everything he hadn't found words for. They didn't need to be legends, they didn't need to be icons, they had already become something more enduring. Proof that love could survive silence, that it could bloom after fire, that it could become a home. And when they were older, with silver threading through their hair, their hands still found each other in the dark without hesitation. The world had changed. New names had risen. Stages had shifted. But somewhere, tucked in a quiet part of the earth, there was a house by the sea where music still played at dusk, where two coffee mugs sat side by side on a porch railing, and where love, stripped of spectacle, still stood, alive, weathered, and eternal.
The fireplace crackled softly in the corner, painting the walls with flickering amber shadows, and the rain outside had begun its slow descent once more, rhythmic and patient, as if the sky itself had learned to move gently for them. The room was warm with age and memory, filled with the faint scent of old wood, citrus tea, and the lingering echo of music that had been played hours earlier. Taehyung sat on the floor beside the record player, thumbing through vinyls with a tenderness that felt almost reverent, each sleeve another chapter of their shared past. Jungkook leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with a quiet smile curling at the edges of his mouth. There was something almost unbearable about the way Taehyung looked in that light, hair slightly tousled, a faint wrinkle between his brows as he concentrated, the shape of his shoulder blades moving softly beneath the fabric of his thin sweater, the one Jungkook had worn years ago during winter and had since claimed as his own. "You always pick the saddest songs at night," Jungkook said, his voice low, affectionate. Taehyung didn't look up. "They're not sad," he murmured, "they're honest. There's a difference. Sadness asks you to feel. Honesty demands that you do." Jungkook stepped forward, knelt behind him, and pressed his chin to Taehyung's shoulder. "You always sound like you're writing poetry even when you're just choosing music. Maybe everything's a poem when I'm with you." Jungkook chuckled, his breath warm against Taehyung's neck, then fell silent. They stayed like that for a while, listening to the rain, to the soft scratch of vinyl slipping from its sleeve, to the unspoken truth in the way they fit into each other without having to try. Later, as the record spun and the first note hummed through the speakers, they curled up on the couch, legs tangled beneath a shared blanket, Taehyung's head resting against Jungkook's chest, ear pressed above his heartbeat like it was a metronome guiding every breath he took. "Do you think we'll remember all of this when we're old?" Taehyung whispered. We are old, Jungkook murmured, grinning. Don't deflect. I think the body forgets, Jungkook said softly, but the heart doesn't. It stores everything. Every sunrise you kissed my shoulder, every fight we didn't walk away from, every time you said nothing but I knew what you meant anyway, it's all there. Even if I forget my name, I'll still know your warmth. Taehyung closed his eyes. If you ever forget, I'll remind you. You always do. In the years that followed, they grew into stillness. Not boredom, but peace. The world moved faster without them and they let it. Others rose to the stages they once ruled. New voices carried their own truths. Jungkook and Taehyung cheered from the sidelines, occasionally sending handwritten letters to young artists who had grown up idolizing them. Their names became legacy, but they never wore the word like a crown, more like a soft coat they folded and tucked away in the closet, only taking it out when the wind got too sharp. They published a book together, part memoir, part journal, filled with sketches and lyrics, letters they wrote to each other but never sent, moments of silence turned into prose. It wasn't a bestseller. It wasn't meant to be. But for those who found it, it became a home. One passage lived on in online forums and fan tattoos, and whispered readings at college open mic nights. He didn't save me. I wasn't drowning. I was hiding. He simply walked into the dark and sat beside me until I remembered how to breathe. They traveled often but quietly. Small towns, coastal villages, places where no one cared about their history and everyone smiled like they knew them anyway. They stayed in borrowed homes and left behind handwritten thank you notes tucked into drawers. They wrote music that they never released, songs full of rain and sea and the kind of love that no longer needed to be proven. Sometimes, when the wind howled against the windows and the world felt far away, Taehyung would sit at the piano and play that one unfinished melody. The one Jungkook had started on a rooftop years ago, before cameras captured what should have been private, before whispers turned into headlines. The melody had changed since then, softened, deepened, filled with new chords only time could teach. Jungkook would hum along from the kitchen, eyes closed, knowing exactly when the note would break, when Taehyung would hesitate, when he would lean into the keys as if surrendering to memory. One winter evening, snow piled high outside their windows and the world blanketed itself in silence. They didn't decorate much, just candles, a few strands of lights. A single silver ornament hung from the beam above their bed. They exchanged no grand gifts, only words. Taehyung gave Jungkook a letter, handwritten, folded into quarters, the paper slightly wrinkled at the edges from how many times he'd held it. Jungkook read it slowly, his hands trembling. It wasn't long, just a confession. I spent so many years afraid that loving you would destroy me, but it was loving you in silence that almost did. Jungkook looked at him, eyes glassy, breath caught somewhere between a sob and a laugh. You still think in poems. You make it easy, Taehyung said. Jungkook didn't speak again. He just crossed the room and kissed him, slow and deep, like it was their first kiss all over again and also their last, like it contained everything they hadn't yet said and all the things they never needed to. As the years passed and their hair grayed and their bodies softened, nothing about them dimmed. If anything, they shone brighter, not in the blinding way fame does, but like candlelight, constant, warm, and unwavering. People still asked about them sometimes. In interviews, at galleries, during music panels. Where did they go? Why did they leave? Are they still together? Those who knew would simply smile and say they chose peace. And that was enough. Because somewhere, in a house filled with music and paintings and laughter and unwashed dishes and photo albums bursting at the seams, they still danced barefoot in the kitchen, still whispered goodnight in the dark, still reached for each other first thing in the morning, still sang to each other under the stars. And in that place where the world forgot to look, love remembered how to stay. The scent of winter never quite left the house after that, even as the seasons shifted and the world outside melted into green. It lingered in the wood grain of the floors, in the folds of their thick wool blankets, in the quiet hush of the wind that swept through open windows as spring arrived without ceremony. Jungkook had started waking earlier, often before the sun rose, not because he needed to, but because there was something about watching Taehyung sleep that stilled the world inside his chest. the rise and fall of his breath, the flutter of his lashes against his cheeks, the unconscious way his fingers would reach for Jungkook in his sleep, as if tethered by some invisible thread. These were the things Jungkook had memorized long ago, and yet each morning they stunned him like a miracle he still didn't believe he deserved. Taehyung always woke slowly, like the day had to earn him. He would roll toward Jungkook, eyes half-lidded, lips soft with the hush of dreams, and murmur something incoherent that Jungkook would answer with a kiss to his forehead or a soft laugh. They didn't rush mornings anymore. There was no need. The kettle would whistle when it felt like it. The birds outside would sing whether or not they were listening. Time had bent itself to their rhythm, and finally, they had learned to live in it rather than against it. Jungkook kept a notebook now, not for music, just for moments. He would write down the way Taehyung hummed while watering the plants, the way he held a teacup with both hands even when it wasn't hot, the way he sometimes stared out the window for so long it looked like he was trying to memorize the sky. They rarely spoke of the past anymore, not because it hurt, but because it had settled. It was a stone at the bottom of a clear river, smooth, unmoving, part of the foundation. There were still nights, though, when memory drifted in without knocking. Sometimes it was sparked by an old song on the radio, sometimes by a fan letter that had taken years to reach them, sometimes just by the silence between two heartbeats too close together. On those nights they would sit outside under the stars, a blanket wrapped around both their shoulders, and talk softly, as if afraid the wind might carry their confessions away. Jungkook once said, "There was a time I thought I lost you for good, that no amount of waiting would bring you back." Taehyung had answered, "There was a time I thought I didn't deserve to come back, but you kept the door open." They had never needed grand gestures, no champagne anniversaries, no stage-lit declarations. But still, every year, without fail, Taehyung would leave a folded note on Jungkook's pillow on the same day they left the spotlight for good. Sometimes it was a sketch, sometimes a lyric, sometimes just a line like, "You looked at me like I was a place, and I've lived in that look ever since." Jungkook never responded with words. He would fold the note and press it into a journal filled with everyone that had come before. But that night, he would always reach for Taehyung with a tenderness so deep it felt like beginning again. As the years passed, their home filled with the artifacts of a life fully lived. Shelves bowed under the weight of books they had read to each other, drawers cluttered with Polaroids, some faded, some sharp, all evidence. Letters in boxes from fans they never met but somehow knew them in the most intimate ways. Paintings from Taehyung that lined every wall, each one less about technique and more about feeling. Music from Jungkook, unfinished demos and whispered harmonies, stored on dusty drives and never shared, because they were never meant to be. They weren't untouched by grief. Friends aged, some passed, and the world kept spinning. There were days of stillness, of loss, of aching silence, but even in that they had each other. On the night Jin passed away, Taehyung had found Jungkook in the garden, sitting on the stone bench with rain falling on his shoulders, not moving. Taehyung had joined him, said nothing, just took his hand. Hours passed before Jungkook whispered, "He was the first person who told me to stop apologizing for loving you." And Taehyung had whispered back, "He was the first person who told me you were my home." In the later years, their walks grew slower but no less filled with wonder. They still visited the ocean, still made tea for each other, still touched in the small, ordinary ways that meant everything. Jungkook developed a tremor in his hands, and Taehyung began writing their shopping lists, drawing little hearts in the corners. Taehyung's eyesight dimmed, and Jungkook began reading aloud again, the same way he did when they were young and scared of everything. They adapted. They evolved. They loved without asking the world for permission.